morning, Rosemary.
Good morning, Mary Jean.
Would you, for the sake of history, please say your name?
Rosemary Trowbridge.
And we'll go through these questions and record you for history. So where were you active in the women's movement?
I was active in the Boston area, but before I was active in the women's movement, I was active in the civil rights movement. 1964 with another woman, Nancy Wynn, who was on campus with me at Albertus Magnus College, a Dominican school in New Haven, Connecticut. We started a civil rights group called Markings, which we named after Doug Hammarskjöld's book Markings, because there was a phrase in it that he wished to be a bridge for others, and we thought that's what we were doing. We would be a bridge for others.
Excellent.
And so we had various teach-ins and speakers about the civil rights movement in the United States. And one of the priests who taught moral theology, one of the Dominican priests, was very active going down south, participating in various demonstrations and sit-ins, was our moral theology teacher. So he was our inspiration and also our faculty advisor. He was a marvelous person.
What was his name?
Father Burns, Clement Burns. I choke up thinking about him. He was a wonderful one. Anyhow, and then we ran a summer project. That's funny. We ran a summer project in New Haven, Connecticut, in the St. Martin de Porres school, elementary school, with the nuns there. And we tutored in the morning, and then we had like camp in the afternoon with the kids there. So, and then we graduated. So it was like a one-year program plus the summer. And the school gave us a dorm to live in, a small dorm to live in. So we had our own little house to live in. So it was great. We had about 8 other women doing it with us. So it was wonderful.
So you mentioned it, and I assume can you talk about how that experience might have led you to the women's movement?
Well, I think there is, in my family, there was always a sense of justice and injustice. And we always talked about politics and Franklin Roosevelt, and my father had started a union. And so it was very much of who we were. And I lived at home in college. I didn't live at school, didn't have the money. So, I mean, from high school through college, we were always watching the news when we were eating and watching everything that was going on in the South, in the civil rights movement, because we had better media then, right? And so what was going on was terrible. And so it was an opportunity to do something. And we also had speakers from students who were at Yale who were from various African countries who came and talked to us about South Africa and apartheid. So we were really global too.
Excellent. And then the women's movement.
Well, after I graduated from college, just to fill it in, I went to live in New York City and wanted to work for the welfare department to see really what was happening to people in the inner city, which was a wonderful experience to really see, how things don't work, And I think there was a program for women with only 30 slots to become hairdressers, for the unemployed, which is nothing, never mind that's not something where you make a lot of money. For men, I think it was bus drivers. Then I took a year off and worked in Switzerland for a year at international school because I wanted to travel. So I was away when both Robert Kennedy and Martin Luther King were assassinated. Although I did march with Martin Luther King and many other people in New York City when he did his anti-war, civil rights march in spring of '67. But people in Switzerland said, why would you want to go back to the United States? Because the war in Vietnam and everything that was going on, they thought that's a terrible place. Why would you go back? So which was interesting. And I moved back to San Francisco, where I was very active, in the anti-war movement, in terms of just precipitating in marches, because there were a lot of wounded coming back from Vietnam to San Francisco to the hospital there at the Presidio. Then I moved to Massachusetts. So I grew up in Connecticut and taught and met a teacher there who was a physics teacher, and unbeknownst to me, she was also president of the Boston chapter of NOW, which she never told me. And she recruited me to join her on the Women's Commission the status of women on the Education Task Force. Because in 1971, Boston now, along with some prominent women lawyers, had got a bill passed through Congress, through the House, so the Massachusetts legislature,
Right.
that forbid discrimination K through 12 based on race, sex, national origin, religion, I mean, you name it, everything but sexual orientation. And that bill was amended in 1993 to add sexual orientation. Right? So anyhow, our job was to work on the implementation of that bill, both the recommendations and the regulations, and testify, and also the implementation of the bill. So I did that for a year, and then I joined. Then my friend Julia said, "Well, you're ready for now. You should join now." And then she told me she'd been president. Yeah.
You want to say her whole name?
Julia Wan. She's a marvelous person who got involved in the late 60s in National Organization for Women and stayed active and is probably still a member now.
Yeah.
Yeah. And served on the national board. She was my mentor.
And talk about your interest in education.
Well, because I was a teacher, I certainly, and of course because I lived my life as a woman with 3 brothers, it was very clear what advantages were open to women or men. You know, I had been interested in law school and grad school actually, and I had an uncle who would pay for my brother to go to law school, but wasn't interested in supporting me in grad school or helping me out. But just my whole mother's life. I mean, she had to quit school when she was 16 to help support the family. During the Depression, so her brother could go on and, get an education. But that never benefited her, except years later when he helped my brother, with Georgetown Law School. So that was great. I've lost track. So where am I?
So talk about now. Julia has allowed you to get active in now.
She's
So
encouraged me.
Yes.
She was very funny. She said, well, don't spend more. And then on the side, I was in a CR group. And she said, well, don't do that more than a year. You need to get active, right? Because it's all about action. And so in the task force, we focused on testifying on behalf of Chapter 622, which was a state law, which also included curriculum, which is fabulous. They won the curriculum battle. And then once Title IX was passed, we also testified on regulations for that. And under Title IX, my interest was of voc tech schools to change the curriculum there. And also there was a lot of sexual harassment and physical harassment with girls being soldered, and there's a lot going on in the voc tech schools too. But curriculum was a big interest of mine. And so in 1975, just my school system encouraged teachers to write grants under, a federal program called library grants. And I also wrote a grant where I get books and movies and film strips I called it Women in Society, about the changing role of women, and materials and curriculum for kids K through 12. Because, that was the arena that I was in every day with kids. And I had girls who wanted to play ice hockey and they couldn't get on the public teams, and so it was all of that. And also the task force had people that were training superintendents and principals. At one point we were used by the state to go and monitor school systems to see how they're implementing the law. So there was a lot to do in education.
Excellent.
Yeah.
So what were the years of your involvement in now?
Well, in Boston now, I was involved, let's say, from, I'd say, 72, 73 through, I was always involved in my chapter through 86 when I just hadn't had enough. So I was, in 1976, I became involved in the state campaign to ratify the state ERA. We ratified the federal ERA early on, but we also have a state ERA, which is very important. So that was 76. 77, I became membership chair. And I had some new ideas, really, to run programs to attract people. So the 2 that I remember that were most exciting to me, one, we had Jean Kilburn come, and with her slideshow, which she had just begun promoting, called Killing Us Softly, about how women were portrayed in advertising and sexual objects, and how that affected the self-esteem and confidence of women and young girls. That attracted a lot of people. And then there was a woman historian who was a colonial historian called Selma Williams, who, after she wrote a book on colonial history, wanted to know more about what happened in Salem. So she wrote this wonderful book called Writing the Nightmare, about the persecution of women as witches in Salem. And she had a huge slideshow that she would take around, so she brought it to our chapter, and that was fabulous. So we did those kinds of things to educate people and bring in more people. And in the following year, 1978, I ran for president of the Boston chapter of NOW. It was the first time we had a contested election, so we really had to recruit people to come and vote for you. And some people criticized me for that, but I was pretty determined that I wanted that job, and because I was a real activist, in terms of going out there and doing things, and I just felt I had a lot of energy and would be the best person. So I was elected. And it was a big year because the ERA extension came up, and we had an important congressional district, the 8th congressional district. Our representative was the Speaker of the House, Tip O'Neill. And fortunately, in our work in the state ERA, I connected with a woman called Mary Murphy, who used to work for Tip O'Neill, was like a family member. So we had a coalition, and we got together and put together a huge gala. And Tip O'Neill in a big hotel in Boston, and he was our main speaker and gave this great speech about women and feminism and equal rights, and it was fabulous. So, and then there was the march that year. We had a big march in Washington, right, for the ER extension, and we also held a walkathon to raise money, and there was lots going on. And also in '77, the year before, a lot of us had gone out to Illinois on the ERA train, so we were supporting, efforts in other states.
Right.
So there was a lot going. We lobbied in Washington for the ER extension. So there was lots to do. It was a big year, '78.
So how long did you serve as president?
The chapter only allowed 1 year,
Oh.
and the idea was that we want lots of women to have leadership experience, which I think is a great idea. And then go on and into your profession or whatever you're doing, but keep going, but give someone else a chance for leadership. So that was the way the chapter worked.
So what did you do after that?
Well, I became chair of the Reproductive Rights Task Force, and because we had a bill that was passed in 1978, the Doyle-Flynn bill, which prevented the state from paying for abortions for state employees, any money for abortion, Medicaid funding also, and so we started doing escort services because the abortion scene got really hot. There was a murder during those years too at one of their clinics, and so I ran escort services, organized that. Because right then at that point, the people that were harassing the women could get right up close to them. I mean, years later, there was a young man who was a member of the state legislature who got a bill passed. They had to stay at least, I think, 16 feet away, but we didn't have that back then.
Right.
So I was always active in the reproductive rights because I thought that was just basic. And then 1980, I ran for delegates at Democratic National Convention in Tip O'Neill's district, which was hotly contested. And fortunately for me, one of the women who had helped us so much in the state ERA was Mary Murphy, who was involved with Tip O'Neill. And so she ran my floor campaign, and we had done lots of phone banking to NOW members and at-large members to get them out. And it was held at a big auditorium at MIT. And it was the first time that half the delegates were women, so they had to choose 3 women. And what was so interesting about that, because there were other women who were running, is that the microphone was very short. And people came up to me afterwards, and they liked what I said, but they also liked that I picked up the microphone and held it to my mouth. I was the only one who was able to figure that out.
Interesting.
It's interesting. Yeah, his body language, right? So that was pretty exciting. And the 1980 convention was in New York, and it was what was exciting about that is that NOW ran a floor operation along with women in the various delegations who were running the delegations for the party. Who were pro-choice, and we actually had a voice vote because we had a Medicaid funding for abortion plank, which was a minority plank. It wasn't voted in, and I think that was the last year they allowed minority planks to be voted on the floor of the convention. So we had 2 planks we voted on. One was the Equal Rights Amendment plank, and one was the Medicaid funding for abortion. Now there was no money behind the ERA plank, but it was very symbolic because that was the first convention that half the elected delegates were women, because women have never been in any kind of a majority voting on abortion. It's always been a male legislature with a sprinkling of women. There were a lot more male delegates because they were added on party delegates. But because it was a voice vote, some of those elected men decided not to be on the floor because your name was called in your delegation and you had to say whether you were up for it or against it. So it was very exciting. And it passed overwhelmingly. And it was marvelous.
Wonderful.
And there was also a lesbian rights platform that was added to the platform. So it was quite a convention. And that's the last time they had floor voting on minority planning. Because I went to the 84 convention, there was none of that.
Okay.
They wanted control of the floor. So, and also in 1980, I was elected to the National Now Board. So that was exciting because then I could be part of I was part of the Now presence there, but also to be part of the National Board to help make policy and, make a difference on the national level. In 1981, I spent the summer working in the Now office in Washington, along with my good friend Colette Roberts, who was also on the board. And we did administrative stuff, calling across the states where there were campaigns. And then in 1982, I was elected as regional director for the Northeast region, which was New England and New York. And so my focus there was starting chapters in New Hampshire, because that's where all the presidential primaries are for the 1984 season. So I started going up to New Hampshire and starting chapters. And there were people in New Hampshire that wanted to start chapters. So through the at-large list, we found people that wanted to start chapters. So I would go and do a presentation, and then the local people would take over. So it was quite exciting. And I was teaching, so I'd get in my car and drive to New Hampshire with no GPS, just maps. And then at night when it was dark, sometimes you were out in the woods trying to figure out how to get back to the Boston area, back to Cambridge. But it was exhilarating. There was a lot of energy. And of course, Mondale was running. And he was responsible for getting a bill passed through the Senate. It was his bill for child care. National Child Care Bill, which was vetoed by Nixon, that was 1972. So women need to get back active on that. So that was 82. That was 82. That was 84. And then I took a leave of absence from my job in 1982 and worked in Florida for the Equal Rights Amendment, working in Fort Lauderdale and what's the fancy place out north of Fort Lauderdale?
I'm trying to think.
No, where all the rich people live. I can't think of it. Isn't that funny?
No, right? No.
No. That'll come to me.
Right.
Anyhow, we had a big event with Betty Ford in Fort Lauderdale, and then we had an event with Mrs. Romney, who was the wife of the governor of Michigan. And God, it's driving me crazy. I can't think of the name of that place. It's the fanciest town in Florida. Anyhow, so that was interesting. And then I went to work in Tallahassee because I was tired of Fort Lauderdale and the other city. And so that was more of a calling. That was running the campaign from Tallahassee. That's where the headquarters were in Florida, which is a very hot and moldy place.
Were you put up by local people? Or how did
Well, yeah, someone in both places. We lived with local people. In Fort Lauderdale, I lived with a teacher, and there were several of us who lived in her house, which was air conditioned. But in Tallahassee, someone took over their whole house. It was a big house, which was not air conditioned. And the women who had been there all year said when they went into the closet to take their suitcases out to leave, there was mold on them because there was so much humidity there. But it was incredible to be in Tallahassee when the ERA extension was not ratified by Florida, because the whole state house just rang with women saying "We'll remember in November," just echoed off the stone walls. And I mean, it was a very, I would say, corrupt legislature. The big issue when we were there was out-of-state banks wanting the right to open branches in Florida because it was so lucrative.
Wow.
Because of all the people there, and I'm sure part of it was also money laundering was big. So that was 1982.
Okay.
Yeah. And I continued to serve on the board. And again, back in my chapter, I was active. And then 1984, I also ran for the Democratic National Convention, got elected from the same district, Tip O'Neill's district, with the help of all the now members who came and campaigning. And that was the year we pushed for a woman on the ticket. And of course, now I was a member of the National Board, and we endorsed Mondale, our PAC did, and we're thrilled that he picked Geraldine Ferraro. And so that was a very exciting convention because we had the first woman, you know. And what I remember about that convention was that there was a woman sitting behind me. She was probably in hers, I'm guessing she was in her 60s, maybe older at the time. And when Geraldine Ferraro was speaking, she was crying. And she said to me afterwards, you know, I didn't think it mattered there was a woman on the ticket, but when I saw a woman up there, I realized how left out I've been all these years. It's very powerful, very powerful.
Right.
And of course, both in the 80 election and the 84 election, back in Massachusetts, we worked very hard for both Carter, even though I was a Kennedy delegate,
Right.
and in 84 it was for Mondale, right?
Right.
And I continued being active until 1986 when my term was over. And I was very, I would say, angry and disappointed and discouraged with the internal battles that we're going with now. So I never renewed my membership after 1986 when I left the board. I went on to other things.
So do you want to talk, I think you have some, you did some work in the lesbian rights movement. gay rights
Yes.
movement.
After I left now, things are heating up in Massachusetts. There is a wonderful organization there called the Massachusetts Gay and Lesbian Caucus. And so I got involved in that, became a board member. And what I did there, that was lobbying. A lot of it was collecting signatures at various events. And also at gay and lesbian pride parades. But also lobbying and also being there when the bill came up, because it came up the year before I passed too, it would come up too. And so I was an elementary school teacher, and my principal would let me leave the school during the day, have other teachers cover my class, and he'd just say, don't get on television. Parents think you're in your classroom. And I would go down and be part of the lobbying effort to get people out on the floor so they would vote. And I did that for 2 years, and it passed in 1989, which was the second state to pass a gay and lesbian civil rights bill. And that was in 1989, and Wisconsin passed the first bill in 1981. And the main sponsor of that bill, Clarenbach, his mother was one of the founders of the National Organization for Women, so he was in the family tradition of working for justice.
So, looking over the whole period of this dynamic leadership, what issues were of greatest concern to you?
Well, I think starting out with civil rights, you know, and then in the women's movement, certainly because I was a teacher, I saw the huge need to open up education, both curriculum, and I know my principal had told me back in the 70s that his daughters couldn't get in the top, you know, the advanced math classes. They're for boys only. And there were so many things, you know. Girls couldn't take shop, you know, they just had to learn to sew and cook and all that. And sports was huge, getting girls into sports at the state level, and the curriculum was huge. I think the abortion issue was really important to me. And then the political stuff. I was very interested in lobbying at the State House, lobbying at the federal level, the elections, the presidential elections. That was important. The referendum we had a referendum on abortion in 1986 in our state, which said that the state government could not regulate abortion. And so it said, well, the referendum said that the state could, so we defeated that.
Right.
And the same year we defeated that, being the second most Catholic state in the nation, Rhode Island did also as the first most Catholic state in the nation, and so did Michigan. So Catholics are pro-choice.
Right.
So let's not forget that. And then when I finished my work after my work on the Mass Gay and Lesbian Political Caucus, then I was from 93 through 96, I was a trainer for the State Department of Education. They had a Safe Schools program for gay and lesbian students. And I became one of the trainers. So my principal would get me a substitute, and with other trainers we would go, and we'd have regional trainers for teachers, principals, superintendents, and then we'd have school trainers where we go into schools and train whole school systems, or we would train high school students. So that was very exciting. I did that for 3 years.
Excellent.
Yeah, and also I did just special trainings for guidance counselors. So that was very exciting.
Mm-hmm. So what do you count as your major accomplishments?
Well, I think I saw myself as an organizer, so I think whether it was education or membership or abortion rights or, organizing chapters, I felt I was really good at pulling people in and kind of motivating people to get involved. And I know when I was at the National Board, I always sent out long reports about what happened in the National Board, to, what issues were up and what was happening, to kind of excite the chapter presidents. And luckily my partner at the time had just bought, this was like the early 80s, an IBM computer, so I didn't have to type it with, worry about typo errors. That, after a while I could use the computer, so that was, as a word processor, that was great. So I was very much interested in getting people involved, getting people active.
What would you count as your most memorable and important experiences?
That's a hard one. I think the ERA Gala was exciting that we pulled that off with Tip O'Neill. I think the March in Washington in 1978 with all the women there, and we had a huge delegation from Boston, was great. I really like lobbying people in Congress and the House, and watching the votes on the ERA extension in the House and the Senate. It's very important. I think running for delegate, that was a big deal to the national conventions, because in my congressional district was hotly contested, but also learning how to do that. Learning how to work the floor, which we used later in other conventions, and also state conventions in the state, because we had a state convention where we passed a pro-choice ballot too, and by organizing the floor the same way, and then we used what we learned at the national convention on the state convention, Democratic convention. There are a lot of things. I think Florida was a big experience, working, seeing how a whole big state campaign worked for ratification. Betty Ford was wonderful. We worked in a Republican state, so it was really an uphill battle. But just seeing, being part of that was huge. Right. And it was important to be on the National Medal Board, I think, to try to push policy in a more active direction. And endorsing Mondale was important, I think. So there are a lot of things. And just the friendships. And the friendships at the local, state, national level that I made were lifelong and, precious.
Indeed. How has, that kind of leads right into the final question that I have. How has your involvement in the movement affected your later life, personally and professionally?
Well, I'd say I came out to myself as a lesbian in 1977, and suddenly as a teacher it was like, oh, now people see me as someone who's going to be, going after and seducing my female 5th and 6th grade students, but no one accused me of doing that when they thought I was straight, of going after my male 5th and 6th grade students. So, I really had to live a closeted life, but once the Civil Rights Bill was passed in Massachusetts in 1989, which supposedly offered protection, I started working on learning how I could build my own sense of safety and support among people in my school system so I could come out. And there was a wonderful group from California called, what was it called? Equity something, it'll come to me, that ran special trainings for teachers on how to do that and how to build allies. So I went to a training in New York City, that the Union Theological Seminary they held, and I went to another longer one out in California. So I really thought carefully what I was doing, because there were out high school teachers in private schools and a couple of public schools, Cambridge and Newton, and so I think I became, if not the first, one of the first that I was aware of. It came out in my elementary school in 1993, And it was wonderful. But you know, I had a lot of support among the faculty, and I worked there for a long time, so it was hard to demonize me. And I also had a grad student come in from the Harvard Grad School who was studying feminist teachers, and she asked if she could, you know, come to my class and spend a lot of time there and observe. And she actually wrote part of her thesis about myself as not only a feminist teacher but as a lesbian teacher. And so there's an article about that in one of the Harvard Ed School journals that's devoted to gay and lesbians.
Nice.
So I mean, my own little way, I made my mark, right? But I know I had a profound effect on my children in my class over the years.
Excellent.
Because I was the only person that would talk about, I'm sure, feminism and civil rights the way I did. And I was a history major, so I always have lots of materials. Kids were very excited about it. And the year that I came out to my class, at graduation, you know, when they were moving on to the middle school, each class would have one person like read a poem, read something they wrote. But the boys in my class, think about this, the boys decided they wanted to dance. So I wonder where those boys are now. And as a group, the whole class danced. And the boys, they picked out this music, and they, you know, choreographed it, and they picked out this wonderful song. And yeah, they picked out this song. They had these wonderful drum rolls, and they all dressed in like flowery shirts, the girls and boys, with sunglasses, and they got all these props from a second grade teacher who was running a circus, so we had like palm trees. And during the drum rolls, they'd stop dancing and they'd yell out the name of a teacher that they had over the years. It was just fabulous.
Oh, it's amazing.
And they were just so free, because I think I just created so much safety. Yeah.
Beautiful.
So I'll never forget. That was great.
Excellent.
And then 2 years later, they hired a gay principal.
See?
So it's, you know, opening doors.
Really? So do you have any closing remarks you'd like to make, Rosemary?
Yes, I think that if you have a passion for justice and you care about people, and I think justice in the world is caring for people, get involved and you'll make a difference. You'll make wonderful friends. It's hard sometimes because people don't always agree, and especially when there's a lot of passions. And you know, some people love power more than issues, and that's an issue too. But just hang in there, and you'll be richly rewarded with friendships, and you'll make a difference, and you'll leave the world a better place.
Wonderful. And you certainly have.